Hello, and welcome to San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Georgetown, Texas. Our mission is to welcome all, promote personal and spiritual growth, and to work for a just, peaceful, and sustainable world. You can learn more about our church at our website, www.sangabrieluu.org. And you can learn more about Unitarian Universalism at www.uua.org. We gather in different ways in these strange days, from computer screens, from telephones, from e-tablets. But however you come to be here, and from whatever background or orientation, we're very glad you're here and we welcome you. My name is Colleen Sigley, and I truly hope you will be inspired and encouraged by our service today.
Good morning. The words to today's chalice lighting were written by Lindsay Bates. To face the world's coldness, a chalice of warmth. To face the world's terrors, a chalice of courage. To face the world's turmoil, a chalice of peace. May its glow fill our spirits, our hearts, and our lives.
Welcome to a Sunday morning service at San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, whatever day you may be watching. All are welcome here. I am Reverend Sandra Ingham, this congregation's interim minister, and the title of my reflections this week is Our Better Half, with a question mark at the end. I hope today to give you an introduction to Universalism, capital U. We are supposedly Unitarian Universalists, Yet, in my experience, the majority of people sitting in our congregations know very little about the Universalist side of our heritage, or why we have to have such a long, drawn-out name. I will be drawing heavily on both Unitarian Universalist minister John Burens, a former president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, and on Helene Knox, a Universalist Unitarian minister, scholar, and feminist theologian. I am deeply indebted to both of them. Burens for his book, Universalists and Unitarians in America, A People's History, and Knox for her cover story, Claiming, Reclaiming Universalism, published in the July-August 1993 issue of The World magazine, our association's now quarterly journal. The opening words were written by Universalist Unitarian minister Gordon B. McKeeman. I have slightly adapted them. We summon ourselves from the demands and delights of the daily round, from the dirty dishes and unwaxed floors, from unmowed grass and untrimmed bushes, from all incompleteness and not yet startedness, from the unholy and the unresolved. We summon ourselves to attend to our vision of peace and justice, of health and security, of delight and devotion, of the lovely and the holy, of who we are and what we can do. We summon the power of tradition and the exhilaration of newness, the wisdom of the ages and the knowing of the very young. We summon beauty, eloquence, poetry, music to be the bearers of our dreams. We would open our eyes, our ears, our minds, our hearts to the simplest dimensions of life. We rejoice in manifold promises and possibilities. I invite you now to join with Jackie and Ron Karish, members of this congregation, in reciting the words of San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship's affirmation. These words also express this congregation's covenant with each other. The words should appear on your screen.
I'm Jackie Karish.
I'm Ron Karish.
We invite you to join us in saying the words of this congregation's affirmation, words that affirm our mission.
The doctrine of this church is love. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer.
To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
Well, here is Karina now, our Director of Religious Education, with the Wonder Box and the story for all ages. Good morning, or afternoon, or even good evening, Karina. I am very curious about what is in that box this week. I wonder what the children will guess is in there. Karina?
Good morning, San Gabriel. It's lovely to be with you today. Have I got a wonder box with me? Yes, I do. Do you have a wondering mind? I hope you do. Love to use our wondering minds to help one another learn and grow. We share our knowledge and our experiences with one another and we'll figure things out together. So let's see. Have you made a guess? Tell someone near you what could be in here. Yep. Let's see. It's small, it's red, it's a little heart. This may have been in the Wonder Box before. I cannot remember, but it is the perfect thing to be in the Wonder Box today. Reverend Sandy is preaching about universalism, and at its core, universalism is all about love. And I've got a story about that, and I bet you can guess the title. It's called
Love,
by Matt de la Peña, illustrated by Lauren Long. In the beginning there is light and two wide-eyed figures standing near the foot of your bed, and the sound of their voices is love. A cab driver plays love softly on his radio while you bounce in back with the bumps of the city, and everything smells new, and it smells like life. Love, too, is the smell of crashing waves and a train whistling blindly in the distance, and each night the sky above your trailer turns the color of love. In a crowded concrete park, you toddle towards summer sprinklers while older kids skip rope and run up the slide, and soon you are running among them, and the echo of your laughter is love. On the night the fire alarm blares, you're pulled from sleep and whisked into the street where a quiet old lady is pointing to the sky. Stars shine long after they've flamed out, she tells you, and the shine they shine with is love. But it's not only stars that flame out, you discover. It's summers, too, and friendships, and people. One day you find your family nervously huddled around the TV, but when you ask what happened, they answer with silence and shift between you and the screen. In your dream that night, you are searching for a love that seems lost. You open and close drawers, lift cushions, empty old toy bins, but there's nothing. You wake with a start in the arms of a loved one who bends to your ear and whispers, "It's okay, it's okay, it's love." And in time, you learn to recognize a love overlooked, a love that wakes at dawn and rides to work on the bus, a slice of burned toast that tastes like love. And it's love in each deep crease of your grandfather's face as he lowers himself onto an overturned bucket to fish. And it's love in the rustling leaves of gnarled trees lined behind the flower fields. And it's love in the made-up stories your uncles tell in the backyard between wild horseshoe throws. And the man in rags outside the subway station plays love notes that lift into the sky like tiny beacons of light. And the face staring back in the bathroom mirror. This too is love. So when the time comes for you to set off on your own, heavy winds will sweep past your building and great gray clouds will congregate above. Your loved ones will stand there like puddles beneath their umbrellas, holding you tight and kissing you and wishing you luck. But it won't be luck you'll leave with, because you'll have love. You'll have love, love, love. The end. Recognizing the love around us is sometimes hard to do, and I hope this book helped you see love and recognize how love is expressed in many different ways in ourselves, for ourselves, by people we know, by our ancestors who we'll never meet, and by others we'll never meet, and also in the abiding love that is in the world around us, in this place, in this universe we call home. We'll talk more about how we can practice seeing and naming love in RE time today. We'll practice being Universalists. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Karina, for that story about love. I was so curious about what could be in the Wonder Box, because I know what I wanted to have in there. I wanted to put love in it, but I didn't know how that would be possible. Because we cannot pass the offering plates when our services are online, there will be information during the musical interlude about how to give to the fellowship in this pandemic time. And that information will be repeated during the postlude. Thank you, Jackie, for that wonderful music. Please, all of you now, take time to center yourselves as we observe a moment of silence and meditation. I have two short readings, both by Universalist Unitarian minister Robert Walsh, to share with you. The first one he titles Acquitted of Universalism. He writes, "In the newspaper, there was a story about a seminary professor in Kansas City who was put on trial by the Southern Baptists, accused of being a Universalist. It's no wonder they were suspicious. He had stated publicly his belief that all people born into the world are children of God. And as if that were not enough, he also supported the ordination of women. Case closed? The professor denied the charges. I'm not a Universalist, he said, and he convinced them. After 4 hours of deliberation, they voted 21-11 to let him keep his job. Now, writes Walsh, I confess to being a Universalist. In fact, I am a Unitarian Universalist. But I wonder, if I were arrested and charged with being one, would there be enough evidence to convict me? The Kansas City story proves that having the right beliefs is not enough. The professor believed that all people are brothers and sisters, that every person has a piece of the divine spark, that women are the equals of men in the sight of God. That was not enough to bring in a guilty verdict. No, if they are going to pin Unitarian Universalism on me, they will have to be able to show that I participated in and supported a Unitarian Universalist church. That is the only way to be sure. Beliefs, no matter how noble, must be embodied in a living institution, or they will have no convicting power. The other brief reading by Walsh is titled, No Hell. No hell, cried the Universalists. Their movement was named for the heresy of believing that a loving God would not condemn any soul to eternal punishment. The idea of universal salvation was shocking 2 centuries ago, but deeply appealing to people raised on religions of fear. The Universalists, capital U, flourished. Later, their movement waned as other denominations softened their images of fire and brimstone. It does not shock today to say there is no hell, yet the idea of hell persists. Some say the reason it has such staying power is that the churches need it to keep people in line. But I think, writes Walsh, It goes deeper. I think the idea of hell stays with us because we are terrified that the ground of being might include both good and evil, both justice and injustice, destruction as well as creation, death as well as life. We have created such symbols as Satan, the lake of fire, and the subtle serpent to isolate and neutralize the threatening side of God. We hold on to hell because when we discard it, we glimpse through the clearing smoke a universe that is too complicated for us. The opening hymn, the opening words, and the story for all ages were all chosen to draw our attention to what the Universalist part of our spiritual tradition is all about: love. The reality of universal love. This love is everywhere, always surrounding us and holding us, whether we acknowledge its presence or totally ignore it. Today's opening words are all about love. Gordon McKeeman lists just a very small number of ways that love is all around us. Everything is love. Matt de la Peña, in his children's story, Love, does the same thing, explaining to the wee little ones some of the many manifestations of love in their lives before they are even old enough to ponder this universal love, but they can feel it. De la Peña also uses a beautiful phrase to remind his young listeners, and his older ones too, that it is sometimes not so easy in life to recognize that universal love that remains consistent and present no matter how bad life seems. And de la Peña does this with the phrase, a love that seems lost, but it is not lost. It is never lost. It is always waiting for us to reclaim it. And the opening hymn, Faith of the Larger Liberty, reminds us that we are blessed and loved because we have a faith that is all about love and freedom and the challenge to use that love and freedom responsibly by loving and repairing a broken world. Faith of the larger liberty, source of the light expanding, heroes of faith in every age, far-seeing, self-denying, wrought and increasing heritage, monarch and creed defying, faith of the free, in thy dear name, the costly heritage we claim, their living and their dying. So let's take a little trip through some of our Universalist history to help us claim and reclaim that costly heritage. First, we will visit a few of our Universalist ancestors and then look at our more recent history from merger and forward. Merger between the Unitarians and the Universalists. John Buren says that the idea of universal salvation, rather than salvation for just the chosen, is an old one. I grew up Presbyterian, so I grew up thinking that salvation, however you want to define that, is predestined. But Buren says universal salvation, that idea is old. Among Christians, it can be claimed that either Paul or Jesus was the first Universalist, capital U. But it is hard for modern readers to understand the deep fear of being excluded from heaven. As I wrote in this week's newsletter, we so-called religious liberals of today tend not to give much thought to salvation. Well, think of that concept this way, not as universal salvation, but as universal love. This universal love holds us all the time, whether we recognize it or not, and calls us to practice a radical form of love and acceptance. Great ideas throughout the ages, I have learned in my years of studying history, don't just appear to one person at one particular place and one particular time in history. For example, Unitarianism, capital U, in Europe in the 1500s, notably it appeared in Transylvania, Poland, northern Italy, England, all at the same time. There was no internet. New ideas pop up all over the place at pretty much the same time, and the concept of universal love is no exception. Enter John Murray, born in 1741, died in 1815. His story is our Universalist miracle story. Murray was an Englishman, an evangelical preacher of the time, and he wasn't a Presbyterian with a capital P, but Murray had a Calvinist bent. And Murray disagreed with another English preacher of that same time, John Relly, who preached universal salvation. Well, Murray didn't agree with that, but eventually Murray became a convert, and you know what we say about converts. They're more zealous than the original believers or proponents of an idea. Think about the anti-former smokers you might have known in your life. How zealous were they about something like smoking? Murray went through a series of traumas. He's still in England, okay? He was shunned after his conversion. He was shunned by his fellow evangelical preachers. And then his only child and his wife died. And Murray couldn't pay the medical bills, so he was sent to debtor's prison. When he got out, he said he would never, ever preach again. And he fled to America, saying as I said, he would never preach again. So it's July of 1770, and the ship he was on hit a sandbar. But Murray was able to get ashore to find help, and there, magically, was a farmer named Thomas Potter. No, we won't have a quiz probably, so don't worry about these names. But there was a farmer, Thomas Potter, who just happened to have an empty chapel on his farm and just happened to be waiting for a minister who would preach and declare a gospel of universal salvation. Well, Murray said to Potter, I'm never going to preach again, but here's the deal. If the ship doesn't move off that sandbar by such and such a time today or tomorrow, okay, I'll preach once. Well, the ship did not move. The wind did not shift. And so Murray preached a sermon and then went on to found a few Universalist churches on the New England eastern seaboard. And we now refer to Murray as the father of Universalism in this country. Eventually, people did begin wondering how it was that Thomas Potter already was in the colonies and already not only knew about Universalism, capital U, but had completely embraced it. Well, we need our myths. John Murray married Judith Sargent Stevens, whose work as a Universalist was overlooked for a long time. She was a well-known author in her time, always supporting Universalist ideas and her husband's ministry through her poems, prose, and plays. There are many people whom we can claim as founders and spreaders of Universalism in the late 1700s and the early 1800s. You might recognize the name Benjamin Rush. He is one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and I think he's the only avowed Universalist to sign it. Benjamin Rush was way ahead of his time, as many Universalists were. Burns calls Rush a multifaceted reformer concerned about public health, mental illness, prisons, and the abolition of slavery. All that in the late 18th century. At the Universalist Convention in 1803 in this country, they came up with this. We believe that there is one God whose nature is love, capital L, revealed in one Lord Jesus Christ, by one Holy Spirit of grace. I love that part. One Holy Spirit of grace, who will finally restore the whole family of mankind, we would possibly say humankind now, restore that family to holiness and happiness. And we believe that holiness and true happiness are inseparably connected, and that believers ought to be careful to maintain order and practice good works, for these things are good and profitable unto men, although I would now say unto humans. By 1815, there were some 125 Universalist congregations in this country, mostly in New England, but spreading also into upstate New York and out to the Middle West. The first congregation that I served as a Unitarian Universalist minister was in Plattsburgh, New York, about 18 miles from the Canadian border, so way upstate New York. And there were many Universalist churches in the area, former Universalist churches. I was once in Cincinnati visiting friends in this time period of late 90s, and was a little lost. I was trying to get to their house. And I went down a side street, and there was this building, and I just glanced at it, and at the top it said, the Universalist Church. It was carved in stone. I don't know what the building was when I passed it, but I turned around and went back and pulled into the parking lot. It seemed to be some kind of office space. I couldn't get into it. Hosea Ballot is another Universalist name you might know. Born in 1771, died in 1852. He was more radical than John Murray. Ballot wrote, if we agree in love, there is no disagreement that can do us any injury. But if we do not, no other agreement can do us any good. Let us endeavor to keep the unity of spirit in the bonds of peace. I would call those words a covenant that might work quite well for any congregation. And of course, like any covenant though, and nice words, our spiritual Universalist ancestors found that to agree in love was far more easily said than done. I want to take us briefly into the mid-1800s now and emphasize how important the social gospel was and is to Universalists. That is, the building of what we call the beloved community, but what in the 1800s we would have referred to as the kingdom of God, a community where all truly are equal, where the playing field is level, where poverty, prejudice, privilege do not exist. That is a social gospel goal. A Universalist National Convention in 1857 laid out no fewer than 40 goals in 4 categories to build the kingdom of God or to put the social gospel into practice. And here they are. Not all 40 of them, not to worry, but the 4 categories: slavery and other economic and domestic relations issues. And that by that they meant women's rights. That was the first one. The second one, anti-war, non-resistance, Indian affairs. That's the second one. Third one, social institutions and habits such as temperance, education, and the Sabbath. Quite sure what that means. And the fourth one, opposition to the death penalty and advocating prison reform and rehabilitation. This is the mid-1800s. Seems to me we haven't solved any of these. You have most likely heard of Clara Barton, born in 1821, died in 1912. I give you their birth and death dates to give you hopefully a better sense of these were real people. Also, if you start doing the math, well, I'll get to that in a minute. So you've probably heard of Clara Barton, right? But have you heard of her contemporary, Mary Rice Livermore, born in 1820, died in 1905. Livermore was a teacher in Virginia before she married, and she lived on a plantation to do that teaching, and she saw slavery firsthand. She became an outspoken abolitionist, even though she married a Universalist minister at a time when Universalist ministers were being told by their parishioners not to press the anti-slavery issue too hard. Unfortunately, this is proof that the Universalists were by no means perfect either. Mary Rice Livermore and her husband Daniel supported each other in this abolitionist work. And Mary was also a feminist, and she called herself that. And she was strongly in favor of equal rights for women, and she did a lot of work in the suffrage movement. Mary Rice Livermore knew how to raise money. She proposed, planned, and managed the two great Chicago fairs that raised almost $1 million for the work of the Sanitary Commission. That was the precursor to the Red Cross. During the Civil War, President Lincoln gave Mary Rice Livermore the manuscript of the Emancipation Proclamation, and she auctioned it off for $3,000 to be used for the Sanitary Commission. The first woman accepted as a preacher with denominational authority was a Universalist, capital U. If you answered Olympia Brown to this quiz question, sorry, you are not correct. It was Lydia Ann Jenkins, born in 1824, died in 1874 in upstate New York. She was never formally ordained, but she was apparently a brilliant, highly articulate speaker who impressed such Universalists as Horace Greeley, whom you may have heard of, when they heard her speak. Jenkins and her Universalist minister husband became co-pastors of the Universalist Church in Clinton, New York, a church I am actually quite familiar with. After they retired as preachers, they concentrated on running a homeopathic medical clinic. Yet another example of Universalists often being way ahead of their time. Olympia Brown, born in 1835 and died in 1926. So do the math with a lot of these people who lived centuries before us, and I think you might be astonished at how long-lived some of them were. Brown was 91 when she died. Olympia Brown is better remembered than Lydia Jenkins because Brown was ordained officially, and her ministry lasted a lot longer. Brown was a Universalist minister in Vermont and Massachusetts, and she was co-founder of the New England Woman Suffrage Association from 1884 to 1912, and she was president of the Federal Suffrage Association from 1903 to 1920, so she had an overlap there, being head of both the one in New England and the federal one. Olympia Brown was forced from her pulpit in Bridgeport, Connecticut, by the congregation's patron, P.T. Barnum, a well-known Universalist. P.T. Barnum, among others, told her she was spending too much time on the issue of women's suffrage. Time constraints being what they are for me today and for any given Sunday service, I'm going to fast forward now to the 1930s, only about 30 years before the merger of the Universalists and the Unitarians. Two more names for you. Clinton Lee Scott is one of them, the only Universalist who signed the Humanist Manifesto of 1933. And if you don't know what the Humanist Manifesto is, look it up, because I don't have time to tell you, and because the humanist controversy is one of 3 or maybe 4 defining moments in our history. Clinton Lee Scott was the 10th of 12 children I still know, Clinton Lee Scott's grandson. John Burens tells us that Clinton played a key role in the spiritual evolution of Universalism that ultimately made consolidation with Unitarianism possible. A large part of that spiritual evolution was a shift towards humanism, which was where the Unitarians were headed from about 1920 forward. And you could say that the majority of the people in our congregations are humanists now, today. Although there are a growing number of Unitarian Universalist Christians, and that may be the fourth defining moment in our history. We'll see. The last name I'm going to throw at you this morning is Kenneth Patton, P-A-T-T-O-N. Look him up look him up wherever you want to, but look in the back of our big gray hymnal for his name. You'll find he has several contributions. He was born in 1911 and he died in 1994. And he was the Unitarian minister of First Unitarian in Madison, Wisconsin. My home, UU Church. I wasn't there then. Patton was the minister from 1942 to 1948. But Patton was eventually the Universalist minister of Charles Street Meeting House in Boston from 1949 to about 1964. He was ordained by both the Unitarians and the Universalists. While in Madison, Wisconsin, Patton recruited Madison congregant, someone you might have heard of, Frank Lloyd Wright, to design a dramatic new meeting house for the congregation. When Patton casually mentioned in a radio sermon that he would like to resign from the white race and become a colored man, that's a quote, a national magazine featured his effort to document the extent of race prejudice, bringing him to national attention. Clinton Lee Scott regarded Patton as the most eloquent, poetic exponent of religion seen in a truly universal, small u, perspective. Merger happens, and before the merger of the two denominations became official in 1961, there was a lot of groundwork, as you might imagine. The women's groups of the two denominations had merged long before the larger groups merged, and the youth groups merged before the bigger groups merged. David Park, Unitarian minister and historian. First I want to give you another quote. Paul Carnes, who would be president of the UUA from 1977 to 1979, said, "Something happened to the Universalists. They met the Unitarians and found that the Unitarians are more or less just like Universalists, except that there are more of them and they make more noise." David Park, Unitarian minister and historian, went to a conference in Syracuse, New York, to plan the merger. So this would have been the late 50s, maybe even in 1960. And he gets to Syracuse and he had to ask a policeman where the Unitarians and the Universalists were meeting. Cop shrugged. "There's some Ukrainians meeting in that hotel over there." Unitarians and Universalists at last were enough alike to blend their families, but too many Americans still had not heard of them. In many parts of the country, they might as well have been Ukrainians. Amusing, yes, but also sad and telling. We still have this problem, getting our message out there. Grasping the concept not of universal salvation, but of universal love is difficult, still not well known or even heard of in vast areas of the world. This universal love holds us all the time, whether we recognize it or not, and calls us to practice a radical form of love and acceptance. I believe that it is more difficult to be a Universalist than a Unitarian, and it is way past time to reclaim our Universalist heritage and pay attention to what it demands of all of us. One person who paid attention was Kenneth Patton. That universal love preached by our Universalist ministers, especially Patton, extends to Mother Earth. It is the Universalist part of our heritage that challenges us to understand, as humans, how we are part of the earth. And you can sing about that now in our closing hymn. We are the earth, upright and proud. I think you'll recognize the tune. And some of you will be able to put the words of the Christian hymn to it. But these words that you're about to sing were written by Reverend Patton.
The words for extinguishing the chalice were written by Robert Shabley. As we extinguish this chalice, may we remember that we drink from wells we did not dig. We have been warmed by fires we did not build. We extinguish this chalice in thanksgiving for those who passed their light to us.
The closing words that I want to share with you are a little longer than usual, so take a deep breath and relax. And these words are from Helene Knox, who has studied Universalism. She writes, she's really studied Universalism. For some reason best known to those who had fought the battle of the merger, there was no hyphen uniting the two heritages into Unitarian Universalism, as there could have been to indicate an integrity of wholeness, WHOLENESS, in the newly created denomination. According to the Reverend Raymond Hopkins, who served on the Joint Merger Commission, that body considered an amendment to hyphenate the two denominational names into one, but its members voted the amendment down. Oral tradition has it that some around this time of merger were calling the new denomination the Great Hyphen, but it wasn't. The truly big debate then was not about that elusive hyphen, but rather about which denominational name would come first. If that vote had gone differently, we would now all be Universalist Unitarians. Ironic, for those who stop to notice it, is that we habitually practice the opposite of what our name plainly declares. If anyone asks about your denomination and you are in a hurry or lazy, you're likely to grab the adjective of our inconveniently polysyllabic name and say, as I have said, Knox writes, countless times, I'm a Unitarian. Now, I, Rev. Ingham, did have said to you in my newsletter blurb, it takes 2 seconds to say, at the most, to say the word Universalist. So how many times, countless times, we say, I'm a Unitarian? Knox writes, this is not even true. Yea, though you speak with the tongues of Chauncey and Channing, famous Unitarians, though your Unitarian pedigree ascend to the Mayflower. Now, for want of a hyphen, according to the adjective/noun logic, you are a Universalist of the Unitarian variety, not some other variety like Hindu or Buddhist. There are also Unitarian churches all over the continent that have not yet changed their names to become Unitarian Universalists. Now, this was written in 1993, but I could tell you many congregations have still not done that. And many of them, like First Unitarian in Madison, never know the Universalist word was in there. Knox goes on to say, I am only now beginning to appreciate the momentous implications of the fact that, according to the democratically voted upon name of my religion, I am a Universalist first and foremost. Unitarianism liberates the individual soul, but Universalism makes demands on it, including the demand for spiritual growth. Universalism arrived at a non-creedal position, but the whole weight of its heritage obliges us to believe in universal salvation, define that as you will, or it makes no sense to call ourselves Universalists. The old Unitarians of the neighborhood of Boston were stereotyped as a cool, rationalistic, Harvard-educated, class-conscious elite. And you can find such folks in the Universalist tradition. But can you be an elitist, snob Universalist? I think not. Universalism makes other daunting demands. You must not lose hope. You must not give in to despair or emotional paralysis. You will not go to everlasting hell, but you must keep the spirit of life burning no matter what hell on earth you walk through or become aware of. You must have love and compassion not only for yourself, which strangely seems hardest of all, but also for everyone else, for animals, for the whole planet as an ecosystem, for the universe finally. We still have a long way to go before we will be practicing what our name preaches. To be a Universalist, you must counter rather than contribute to the racism, sexism, ageism, homophobia, and other pathologies of our society. You must not use any category whatsoever to injure other people. You must not use any category whatsoever to injure other people. Try it. Can you live without conscious or unconscious prejudice? Do you even believe in trying to do this? If not, how can you be a Universalist? Will you have to resign from your UUA-affiliated church? And if so, where will you go? Or will you continue to call yourself a Universalist but not practice Universalism? Or will you just say, as so many of us do, I'm a Unitarian? Well, that's not good enough. Belief in Universalism enables relation and genuine, tender contact. For to believe in universal salvation is to affirm the worth and dignity of every person, a radical principle undergirding Universalist theologies. We can begin to fulfill this prophecy of universalism by building multicultural worship communities where the wide diversities among us are not just accepted but celebrated, where the joys and sorrows of who we really are and are becoming can be expressed and shared. I hope that's what you will try to do here in the coming months and years. Amen. Blessed be. May it be so.